From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hana Zubairi. Our top story is on the 10th day of the Islamic month of Muharram. This is the day when Imam Hussein was killed over 1400 years ago for taking a stand against tyranny and corruption. Imam Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the son of the fourth Khalifa of Islam, Ali, may peace be upon him. He is loved by all Muslims, and his legacy inspires millions to strive for a just society. Although he's revered by all Muslims for his sacrifice, Shias consider him one of their 12 Imams. They carry out processions on this day throughout the world to remember him. These are called Ashura processions. In Afghanistan, Shia Muslims observing Ashura processions in Kabul have been attacked in the past. Some of these bombings were claimed by ISIS. There were no reports of violence at these events in Afghanistan this time, according to the AFP. This year, Taliban promised to protect Shia processions in Kabul. More details in this report by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
Within a week after the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, Afghan Shiites commemorated the holy day of Ashura. The Taliban not only sent representatives to attend, but provided security as well. Its armed fighters formed a protective shield around the Shias.
We've attended these ceremonies every year, but with a lot of fear and trepidation that the moment the number of attendees increases, there's a chance of a suicide bombing, a chance for bloodshed to happen. But this year, after hearing that the Taliban are giving full security, we became very happy and gathered here. Truly, nothing went wrong. We're very happy. The ceremonies went very well. I hope they are always held this way.
The Shias, however, are skeptical about the Taliban's good faith. They remember 25 years ago, Mullah Omar told Kabul residents, "We do not believe in any kind of revenge." 2 days later, they killed President Mohammed Najibullah, dragged his bloodied body outside, and hung it from a post. The Taliban are Sunnis and are known to carry hostilities against Shia Muslims. Although the Taliban were toppled in 2001 for hosting Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, Shias, especially Hazaras, remained a target for deadly bombings.
We had made these plans and will have more. Thankfully, since yesterday, when Ashura started, till today, we coordinated with the institutions and commanders. And we ordered them that all those places where our brothers' ceremonies are taking place must be kept secure. Thankfully, everything has gone well according to our plan. All the areas and roads where the ceremonies are taking place have been closed, and brothers from all areas present there and will not give way to those with ill intentions.
Ashura is one of the most important periods of the year for Shiite Muslims. There are around 3 million Shiites in the overwhelmingly Sunni Afghanistan. Most of them belong to the Hazara ethnic community. Bringing people together in Afghanistan will not be easy. But if America and the Taliban can talk, and if the Taliban can protect Shia processions of Ashura, then there is some hope for the future of Afghanistan.
The U.S. State Department has continued its diplomatic talks with the Taliban in Doha, Qatar, as it has been doing since 2018. President Biden also mentioned this in his address today.
We've been in constant contact with the Taliban leadership on the ground in Kabul, as well as the Taliban leadership at Doha.
At the same time, American military commanders are in constant communication with Taliban militants over security around Kabul International Airport. John Kirby is chief spokesman for the Pentagon. He disclosed on Tuesday that U.S. officers were speaking with Taliban commanders multiple times a day. The top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, Admiral Peter Vazley, is negotiating with his Taliban counterpart. However, the U.S. is skeptical about the command structure of the Taliban. American military commanders believe that agreements negotiated by leaders may not fully reach fighters in the streets. The Pentagon said Thursday that it had airlifted about 7,000 people out of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, in the past 5 days. Here's President Biden.
There's no one more important than bringing American citizens out. I acknowledge that. But they're equally important almost is all those SIVs, we call them, who in fact helped us. They were translators. They went into battle with us. They were part of the operation.
The AFP is reporting that the Pentagon believes that the Taliban appear to be cooperating to allow Afghan nationals registered for special U.S. visas to reach the airport. Afghanistan's Tolo News is reporting that thousands of Afghans have flocked to Kabul airport since Sunday to leave the country. However, not every Afghan at the airport is being allowed in. Most do not have documents to prove that they have worked for the US or any other Western NGO. Tolo reported that the Taliban and US forces have treated people at the airport very harshly. The news channel reports so far 40 people in desperate crowds have been killed or seriously injured. This is either from gunfire, stampeding, or falling from aircraft as they're taking off. Rumors that people are able to leave Afghanistan is bringing even more people to the airport. India is only accepting Hindu or Sikh refugees from Afghanistan. As Afghans are desperately trying to seek refuge in faraway countries, India by law cannot take Muslim Afghans. Afghans must declare themselves to be Hindus or Sikhs to be accepted by the self-proclaimed world's largest democracy. This is a result of a controversial law passed by the controversial Hindutva government of current Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The law does not allow persecuted Muslims from Afghanistan or other countries to apply for citizenship in India. It similarly exempts Rohingyas facing genocide in Burma. Meanwhile, the Taliban, at the request of the Indian embassy in Kabul, escorted the Indian nationals to airports so they could return home. Uzbekistan said on Monday that it forced the landing of 46 Afghan aircraft carrying 585 troops that had illegally crossed its border. The country's state prosecutor said 22 military planes and 24 military helicopters arrived at Termez airport in southern Uzbekistan on Saturday and Sunday. Among the planes that crossed the border into the Central Asian nation was an Afghan military plane that crashed in the southern province of Surkundariyo. The state prosecutor said that the crash occurred after a collision between an Afghan military plane and an Uzbek government plane that was assisting its landing. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a news conference on Friday with German Chancellor Angela Merkel that the political reality is that Taliban controlled most of Afghanistan and outside forces must not impose their views on the country. Merkel had asked Putin to pressure the Taliban to evacuate civilians. 49-year-old Floyd Ray Roseberry of Grover, North Carolina, has been arrested after negotiations for threatening to bomb congressional buildings. The suspect is a supporter of former President Donald Trump. Roseberry had threatened that he had a bomb. He was live streaming on social media from his truck parked next to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. In the video, Roseberry attacked President Joe Biden and Democrats. He also warned of a revolution and complained about the U.S. government and its policy in Afghanistan. Multiple buildings in the area were evacuated Thursday and several roads closed off. Police found bomb-making material in his truck, but no actual bomb. Alabama GOP Representative Mo Brooks sympathized with the suspect. Brooks also spoke at a January 6th rally of Trump supporters before they invaded the U.S. Capitol that day. President Joe Biden has canceled $5.8 billion in student loan debt for the disabled. The move will benefit more than 320,000 borrowers. President Biden, however, remains under pressure from Democrats to cancel $50,000 per borrower in student debt for all. Massachusetts police can easily seize your money. Under a system called civil asset forfeiture, police and prosecutors in Massachusetts can confiscate and keep money and property they say is suspected as a part of a drug crime. They can hold that money indefinitely even when criminal charges have been dismissed. Trying to get one's money back is so onerous, legal experts say it may violate due process rights under the US Constitution. This is especially difficult for people with low incomes. Massachusetts is an outlier among states when it comes to civil forfeiture laws. Prosecutors there are able to keep seized assets using a lower legal bar than in any other state. A suspected Christian militia attacked a convoy of 90 Muslims last Saturday in Nigeria's Central Plateau state. Police said they killed at least 22 people. They also said they received a distress call in the morning that a group had attacked a convoy of 5 buses with Muslim passengers. Muhammad Ibrahim, who escaped, said that the Muslims were returning from Bauchi state. He said this was after attending an event to celebrate the Islamic New Year. A local government representative said that the death toll from the attack was much higher. The death toll from a terrorist attack in Burkina Faso's northern Sahel region rose to 120 on Thursday, the government said in a statement. The attack took place Wednesday when a joint convoy of civilian soldiers and army auxiliary members were targeted. During the fighting, 59 civilians, 15 soldiers, and 6 army auxiliary members were killed. Security forces also shot dead 80 terrorists. President Roch Marc Christian Kabul announced Wednesday in a decree that a national mourning period of 72 hours will be observed beginning Thursday. He ordered flags to be flown at half-mast throughout the country. Kabul also banned demonstrations and popular gatherings such as weddings and festivals during the mourning period. Many people have been killed at the hands of terrorists since 2015 in the West African country. More than 230,000 people have been internally displaced, according to official figures. The attack comes a day after the UN Security Council declared its concern about the deteriorating security situation in some countries of West Africa and the Sahel region. It also expressed alarm about the rise of terrorism there. Coming up next after our break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. The U.S. Treasury has frozen billions of dollars in Afghan government reserves that are deposited in the United States in bank accounts here. So where are the Taliban officials getting the money to run Afghanistan? Gretchen Peters is an executive director of the Center on Illicit Networks and Transnational Organized Crime, or better known as CINTOC. She's a leading authority on the intersection of crime and terrorism, money laundering, and transnational crime. She says despite all of this, the Taliban have a lot of money and are really well funded right now. So to join us and to discuss this further, welcome, Gretchen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Gretchen, how long have you been studying the Taliban?
I covered Afghanistan as a journalist for about 11 years, working on both sides of the Durand line in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I spent a lot of time looking at and researching and reporting on the illicit activities undertaken both by the various factions of the Afghan Taliban, but also the Pakistani Taliban and other regional jihadi and extremist groups like Hizb Islami and Lashkar-e-Taiba and Al-Qaeda and other groups. So, all of these groups to some extent engage in some sort of illicit activity, whether it's extortion rackets or taxing trade that happens in their areas, both gray and black market trade, and engaging in kidnapping, timber trafficking, drug smuggling, all sorts of stuff. So I've looked at this across multiple different groups.
So right now, the Taliban that are in power, what is their primary source of funding?
Well, the Taliban have multiple sources of funding, and it's important to recognize that there are multiple Talibans. There are multiple factions, including the Haqqani network, which is out of the southeastern part of Afghanistan and the border areas from Pakistan. And there's also what's known as the Ashura Taliban, which operates more widely in the south and west of Afghanistan. The Taliban gets a lot of money from the opium trade in Afghanistan, both from taxing it and also trafficking drugs and also taxing and running, in some cases, drug processing plants. Other factions of the Taliban engage in timber trafficking, in artisanal mining, and they raise a huge amount of money just taxing the enormous amount of trade that goes, regional transit trade that comes through Afghanistan, goods that are coming in from Pakistan's Makran coast and trucked up to the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then up into Central Asia and parts of southern Russia.
Speaking on Tuesday at their first press conference since taking power, Zabihullah Mujahid, the Taliban spokesman, promised that the new government would not turn into the world's leading producer of opium, and essentially Afghanistan would not be a narco state. What do you make of this statement?
Well, Afghanistan already is the world's largest producer of opium, so the Taliban will have a tough time making that change anytime in the near future. The country is incredibly dependent, and farmers across the country are incredibly dependent on the opium trade to survive. So I don't think that they'll be able to get rid of it. In the past, back in 2000, when the Taliban were last in power, they did successfully impose a ban on farmers growing poppy, but they continued nonetheless to allow processed opium, to be exported from the country, and they taxed it and ended up making more money. So I would say the international community needs to be very wary of any promises the Taliban make about stamping out the poppy trade. That being said, the Taliban has been very effective at collecting tax from the regular transit trade, and I do believe that they'll be able to effectively continue taxing goods that come through the region.
In your book, Seeds of Terror, How Heroin is Bankrolling the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, you said that this previous ban that you just spoke about on poppy cultivation was tactical. Can you expand on that?
Yes, I believe it was tactical. The Taliban were under tremendous pressure at the time to stamp out the opium cultivation, and they stood to receive hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid, mainly through the United Nations, if they successfully eradicated the opium trade. However, what happened was that there had been so much poppy grown in the years leading up to the ban that they were sitting on a glut, and the prices the bottom was falling out of the opium market. And so what we saw happen was that the Taliban banned the cultivation of poppy, but they didn't do anything to stop poppy from being exported. And so many of us who were close to what was going on were able to discover that the Taliban leadership and the Taliban coffers grew widely as a result of this ban. So we believe it to be a tactical move to improve their position in the eyes of the international community, but still quietly make a lot of money off of the drugs trade. Again, I think the international community is going to have to take anything the Taliban say about promising to ban the opium trade with a grain of salt. Another important thing to mention right now is that in a lot of parts of the world, particularly the United States, which is battling a huge problem with addiction to opioids, the problem is really driven not by heroin or opium products that have been cultivated, but synthetic products. So in fact, demand globally for traditional heroin, in a way, not these synthetic products, has gone down. And in fact, Afghanistan and the Taliban regions in recent years have become a larger player in the production of methamphetamines. So another move the Taliban couldn't pull at this point would be to make another tactical retreat from allowing Afghanistan to grow poppy, but they could still continue to produce other narcotics.
And there has been a plea for them for international assistance for alternative crops. What have you? Another question that I actually really want to ask is: do you think this continued? There is this demonizing and dehumanizing of Taliban in international media. Much of it is, yes, they have done atrocious actions when they were last in power. But do you think this will hinder peace, lessen the way that they're trying to present a moderate version of themselves? Or do you think this is all a sham?
Well, again, there's many different Taliban, and we're seeing that in the streets of Kabul and across Afghanistan today. Some units have behaved in a fashion that's relatively moderate. They have been, in fact, there have been calls from some, I was speaking to Afghan officials earlier today who were saying that the negotiators for the Taliban are saying that they want to have to be part of a multi-party government, that they want to continue to let Afghans elect their leadership, but they simply want to be able to participate in politics in Afghanistan. There are other units of the Taliban that are roaming the streets of Kabul, that are operating in other parts of the country, that are being very violent and thuggish, and are essentially behaving much the same way, if not worse, than they did 20 years ago when they were in power. So I think we have to be mindful of the fact that there are, as in any party, there are people who are more moderate and people who are more extreme. And it's going to be a question of which faction of the Taliban is able to, take command of their overall organization, if you can even say that they've come back into power as one organization. There have always been many factions of the Taliban, and they do not always get along. In fact, sometimes they'll actually fight each other.
Yes, there's this banner like the Taliban, right? And so as you're saying that there are different factions, perhaps do you think it would be a better journalism to identify those factions and connect their actions to their actual names rather than, I'm just looking at this from a perspective from within the Muslim community, that there seems to be, there are people who want peace in Afghanistan, who want the Afghans, they are wondering if the Afghans are not in support of the Taliban, why did it fall so quickly into their hands? So there are many questions that I know our community is asking, and experts like you can help us figure some of that out. So yes, I'd really love your take on that.
Well, I think we're still learning why, and piecing together why Afghanistan fell so quickly once the Americans really substantially started pulling out. And I think there were a number of factors. One appears to be that the Taliban, for months leading up to the American withdrawal, had been conducting a campaign in the countryside to bribe and threaten regional commanders and local government officials and tribes to come over to their side, essentially saying, if you we'll give you money if you peacefully accept the Taliban back into power in this area, or we will, and then issuing threats for what if they didn't accept them. So one issue was this very well orchestrated, in my opinion, very organized fashion in which the Taliban rolled across the countryside in the months leading up to the American withdrawal and really set the stage to move across the country. I've also, this is the third time since I've been in Afghanistan that the government has flipped. So I was first started working there in 1996 when the Taliban was originally in power. And after 9/11, when the foreign troops started rolling in, the Taliban basically melted away, and most of the country, again, fell to the United States without many shots being fired. The same thing happened this time when they came back, and actually when the Taliban came into power the year before I got there, the same thing happened. It's been my experience, and I've spoken to other Afghans and Pakistani friends who have covered the region for decades, much longer than me even, and we've all come to the same conclusion. I think Afghans are not only pragmatic, but they're war weary. They don't want to fight, and they don't want to see their homes and their villages destroyed again. And so when they feel like the wind is blowing a certain way, people will start getting in line behind that. And they saw the Americans were pulling out. And while surveys and various other indications show that on the balance, the Afghans preferred the government of Ashraf Ghani over the Taliban, it wasn't like they were particularly enamored of that government. That government had been very corrupt, both under Hamid Karzai and under Ashraf Ghani. The government had failed to deliver on a lot of services that people wanted. And so I think there was a reticence to really stand up and put their lives on the line to support that government.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your analysis. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back after these messages for our next analysis segment, so stay tuned.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
In one of our previous segments, we discussed the recent IPCC report on climate change. Let's watch.
Thank you, Hina. Today we are honored to have Ambassador Jennifer Haverkamp. She's director of Graham Sustainability Institute at the University of Michigan. Is a veteran of 7 United Nations climate summits. If anything happens in a summit, she knows it. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
My pleasure.
Ambassador, please share with us what is this new report by IPCC says?
The new report is the clearest message that climate change is unequivocally caused by human behavior. This is something that people have known for a long time, but what this report says is that it is absolutely clear, and also it's notable in that 195 countries, governments, have agreed with this conclusion.
But these countries have not met yet, right? They are supposed to meet in November about this report.
That's right. The countries meet every year to implement the United Nations Convention on Climate Change and to negotiate new agreements. The one in Glasgow, Scotland, this November is especially important because it's when countries come forward with more ambitious targets for themselves than what they first agreed to back in Paris in 2015. And this report is timed to inform those conversations. And it is very much the hope that countries will read this, they will see it as a huge wake-up call, and bring much more ambition to the table.
Ambassador, the report refers to data which is of 2020. While this summer we are aware of a whole lot of fires burning almost in all continent, including Siberia, and floods, which people are calling 1,000-year floods in China and 100-year flood in Germany. So why the report does not refer to the current data and instead of relies on the older data?
I'm not sure, but my guess would be that these reports take a long time to develop. They're based on 14,000 different scientific studies that have been reviewed, assessed, summarized, and approved. And it may just be that the latest information was too late to get into this particular report. But the extreme events that we've seen this summer, as bad as they are, they're of a pattern that we've been seeing over the last couple decades.
Ambassador, you have been to 7 such summits. Are there everybody on the same page, or there is a live adversarial communication which takes place in these summits as well?
These climate summits are always challenging because every country comes to it with their own national interest in mind, and they come at very different levels of economic development, different perceptions of what their own role is in solving the problem going forwards. There are often disagreements around how much support should be given to developing countries for adapting to the consequences of climate change. But what you really see with this report, and also, frankly, with the Paris Agreement in 2015, is countries finally came together and said, we all need to work together and do our part to solve this. And under the Paris Agreement, each country makes its own commitment for what it will do toward addressing the problem.
What is your assessment? Are people keeping up with those commitments?
It's a mixed bag. I should start by saying the commitments from 2015 were not themselves ambitious enough. And that's one reason this report was designed, this agreement was designed for every 5 years for those to be evaluated and strengthened. And that's what's happening in Glasgow this year, is the first evaluation of those commitments. It's also true that some of the countries have not made the progress that they should have on that. And so these events and the lead up to these events are also kind of a chance for countries to encourage each other, to hold each other accountable. There's also very much, to a certain extent, how fast they can make the changes that this report says we absolutely need to make is dependent somewhat on the development of policies and new technologies across the globe.
You seem to agree with Greta Thunberg, who tweeted that there is nothing new in this report, which we already did not know, then why there was a need for another report?
I think what's needed here is the recognition that the governments are supporting this report's results, that scientists from all over are agreeing on these conclusions. And the other thing that you see is this is the sixth in a series of these reports that have come out for the last couple decades. And each time they come forward with greater certainty. They might have started with saying likely connection between human activity and climate change, and more likely, very likely. And this time it's unequivocal. And that should really silence the doubters that are out there.
Well, silencing the doubter may involve politics. Why do you think a issue which scientists are talking about has become a political football?
I think that part of the issue is that there has been uncertainty around how to address the problem and what the solutions to the problem would be, which creates reluctance to make commitments. What you've seen over the last several years is really wonderful increases in technology and the lowering of the cost of renewable energy, so that there is clear pathways for countries to see ways to reduce their emissions.
Cost is the issue most likely for the developing countries which are at a lower stage of development or changing their economy from traditional means to the modern means. Do you think those countries will be as enthusiastic in terms of support from the civil society to implement some of the recommendations?
What I think was a real breakthrough in the Paris Agreement was recognizing that each country should be able to set its own commitment for what it felt it was capable of taking on. And so developing countries, every country has great latitude in what their own commitment would be. And there are built-in mechanisms for helping countries to meet the obligations that they choose to take on. It's also the case that there's also been much more work done on the cost of inaction of climate change. And you see this already in the huge costs that we're suffering from hurricane damage or the forest fire damage. And it's increasingly clear that whatever cost it might take to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, it's way less than the costs that we'll be facing if we don't take action.
Senator Ed Markey tweeted, if senators truly followed the science in the IPCC report, we would have 100 votes for the climate change. Of course, he wished he had 100 votes. Do you think with this report, which you said gradually have asserted itself, that this is it, it is not likely, it's not most likely, but this is the situation, do you think it will have a bigger impact in the processes in our Congress?
I can hope. I think that we have, unfortunately, a history of some members of Congress not paying attention to the science, even when it's been very clear, like this has been for a long time. But I think the other thing that's happening, and what gives me more hope, is that reports like this are being noticed by the public. And there's increasing public opinion in support of action on climate change, increasing pressure on these members of Congress. And there's more and more signs of efforts to find bipartisan solutions to address the problem. It's not as much as we need, and it's not happening as fast as we need, but it's starting to go in the right direction.
You mentioned the word term bipartisan support. Is scientific community doing anything to enhance the bipartisanship on the issue? Because it got stuck in partisanship for a long period of time. Al Gore being a champion, he being Democrat. There was reluctance on the other side, although I heard President Bush has been chopping wood and doing some of the things in his house which are climate supportive of the climate consideration. What scientists can do to liberate it further from being a bipartisan to making it a bipartisan issue?
Frankly, I don't think it's the responsibility of the scientists at this point. They have done their job. They have done their research. They have presented their conclusions. And it's now up to the voters. It's up to companies. It's up to influencers and decision makers to take that up and move forward and persuade each other. And frankly, politicians are responsive to their voters. And so people who read this report need to make clear that they expect more of their elected officials.
Do you think civil society and civilians, individuals are more enthusiastic to make changes than our government?
It's a question too of when you say our government, which part of government you're talking about. The new Biden administration has committed to a whole of government approach to addressing climate change across every agency, and they're seeking ambitious legislation, they're writing regulations, and you see across many states, many localities, serious action being taken on climate change. So it's really not a one or the other, yes or no. I think there are a lot of government officials across the country who are very seized with doing something on this issue. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Mr. Camp, tell us, if you're in Senate, I don't know whether it's a good wish or a bad wish for a person of your stature, what changes would you like to see happening in this Congress?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to see the Congress to provide the kind of funding that's needed for research in climate and clean energy technology. I would like them to go forward with an infrastructure package that also puts significant resources into public transportation, that puts things into reforming our electricity grid so that renewable energy, where it's produced, can reach the population centers that need it. I would like to see Congress in some form put a price on carbon so that we get the right price signals across the entire use of carbon, fossil fuels, what the real costs are so that people have the right incentives to use less, and where it's cost effective to switch to renewable energy. And one other thing that I really, really think needs to be done, and this IPCC report really highlights for me, is if we're going to have a chance of avoiding some of the worst effects, what we really need to focus on in the near term is methane. The emissions that are released from oil and gas production, from leaks, that come from agriculture, that come from waste disposal, landfills. Methane is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. It's 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and it's one of the easiest, fastest ways that we can make a big difference in the emissions. And a lot of the ways to reduce methane are actually going to pay for themselves because it means the companies can capture the methane and sell it.
Individuals, citizens, they have been recycling forever, and our kids are ahead of the older generation. What people can do, because it's still, if they want to have solar energy for their house or something, it looks like a very costly option.
And I think for a lot of people, they can again, try to create political pressure so that the regulators push the utilities to move themselves faster to more and more renewable energy in their mix. I think the other thing that people can do is their utilities will come and do a energy audit of their homes. And so people can find how much energy they're unintentionally wasting. Other things that people can do is when you're traveling, think hard before you fly if it's a short distance, because flights are very energy intensive and there's not an easy way to reduce that. You can take public transportation or walk more around your home. You can think about reducing the kinds of food that you eat that are high energy. There are a lot of individual activities that people can do that add up to make a difference. But I also want to say that one of the most important things they can do is send the signals to their governments and to the companies they purchase from that they care and they expect low carbon, sustainable activity on their part.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Haverkamp. You have been helpful. Are you planning to attend the Glasgow Summit?
I'm not sure yet. It's since I'm no longer with the U.S. government, I don't have an official role, and they're fascinating circuses of people from all over the world who come together, all of whom care about doing something on climate change. So it's a great thing to do, but on the other hand, I don't want to get in the way of the real important work that has to be done.
Thank you so much. Totally appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Back to you, Hannah.
That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.